The Russia-Ukraine war has lasted for 2.5 years. The Ukrainian army's surprise attacks on the Russian mainland are not sporadic events. Under such circumstances, Russia should not be clueless about border defense at home. The gradient allocation of troops, the arrangement of reserve forces, and related plans should not be blank. There are many aspects worthy of criticism in this regard, and we will specifically discuss them later. This article will first talk about the loss of a Russian military convoy in Kursk Oblast. Everyone should have some understanding of this loss on various platforms. Simply put, a Russian military convoy in the direction of Kursk was covered by the long-range firepower of the Ukrainian army, resulting in the damage of more than 10 trucks and the casualties of many soldiers on board. To be blunt, the Russian army suffered heavy losses this time. As can be seen from the released video, the bodies of several Russian soldiers were in the damaged military vehicles. Although netizens who have a little understanding of the military are no strangers to concepts such as firepower coverage and fixed-point strikes, it is rare to actually see the tragic situation after the strikes. Let's sort out the basic situation of the attack on the Russian military convoy this time and briefly talk about it. First of all, let's take a look at where the attack occurred. When I first saw the video, I thought it was attacked near the war zone. After all, in this direction, the border defense team composed of Russian border guards, the National Guard, conscripts, mobilized soldiers and even militiamen. Its strength and actual combat awareness are really not admirable, especially the attack on the marching column composed of large Russian army trucks in Kursk Oblast. This situation has occurred as early as June this year. At that time, a convoy composed of more than 10 trucks was driving on the road swaggeringly, but was discovered by the drone unit of the 53rd Mechanized Infantry Brigade of the Ukrainian Army and was brutally attacked. The location where the Russian army was attacked is actually close to the border, less than 3 kilometers. And it is precisely outside the storm center Suja city this time. Or to put it more bluntly, it is in the area where the Ukrainian army crossed the border first this time. Since the Russian army obviously did not deploy regular army reserves in Kursk Oblast, the Russian troops who first went to reinforce were still local lightly equipped mobilized soldiers, conscripts, the National Guard, etc. The quality and combat readiness awareness of these soldiers are poor, so it is quite normal for a dense convoy to be bombed. However, after matching the geographic location information, this situation is not that simple, because the location where the Russian army convoy was attacked is not near the current war zone, but in the village of October, several kilometers east of Relieske. The E38 highway passes through the village, and the Russian army convoy is densely parked on the road, is about 36 kilometers from the nearest point of the Russia-Ukraine border, about 50 kilometers from the current storm center Suja city, and about 30 kilometers from the nearest active area of the Ukrainian army. We are certainly aware that this distance range is not a safe place, but for the non-field troops of the Russian mainland, there is no intuitive feeling after all. The West lifted the restrictions on long-range strike weapons against the Russian mainland after the restart of the war in the northern part of the Kharkiv Oblast, and it was also limited to some targets in the Belgorod Oblast. Due to the lack of intelligence positioning information and weapon use permission provided by the West, the Ukrainian army has never launched Western long-range firepower to Kursk Oblast, since they have never faced similar threats and there is no need for field operations. Of course, we cannot expect too much from the Russian soldiers who were temporarily recruited, but this time, the situation is obviously different. In the past, when the Ukrainian army attacked the Russian mainland, it fought under the names of so-called Russian Volunteer Corps and Free Corps, and did not admit that it was the Ukrainian army participating in the war. This time, it blatantly fought under the banner of the Ukrainian army, planted flags and checked in directly using the Ukrainian flag. and the Ukrainian army used Western main battle equipment such as Stryker armored vehicles and Marder infantry fighting vehicles. Without any intention of covering up this series of actions by the Ukrainian army indicates that its attack this time has been recognized by Western countries. Correspondingly, Western countries will inevitably lift restrictions on the use of weapons and provide long-range intelligence support the Russian army convoy that was attacked in the village of October this time. In fact, it is very difficult for the Ukrainian army alone to accurately lock it. It must be that the West provided general intelligence, with a basic intelligence direction. The Ukrainian army's drones took off again and flew deep into the air directly above the target area for confirmation and surveillance. If the Russian army convoy had left, the Ukrainian army would have had no way to deal with it. But it stayed in the local area for a long time. And it was a convoy of trucks full of light infantry. Just in this time window, the Ukrainian army coordinated the HIMARS rocket launchers in the war zone and fired for shells at the convoy in one breath. The first shell hit the middle part of the convoy, and the subsequent 3 shells hit the right side. Therefore, the more than 10 vehicles lost by the Russian army were all located in the middle and rear of the convoy during the intervals of the for ammunition firings. Some of the vehicles in the front of the convoy left the explosion area, and the infantrymen in the vehicles that were not directly hit jumped out of the vehicles to take cover, thus avoiding certain losses, but around the explosion. Even if the Russian infantrymen who jumped out of the vehicles were not directly killed or burned to death, there would definitely be casualties. The specific time of the Ukrainian army's strike was probably late on August 8th. That night, a video of the burning truck convoy filmed by the Russian side appeared. What we saw more was the on-site video taken by the personnel on another vehicle when it passed through the strike area during the day on the 9th. At this time, the attack site has undergone initial cleaning, but the bodies of Russian soldiers killed in action on some of the vehicles can still be seen, and the damage conditions of a total of more than 10 vehicles are also clearly visible. Some Russian sources said that 26 people were killed in this attack. But this data is probably incomplete because we do not know the statistical standards for immediate deaths, those who died of serious injuries, etc. According to our understanding of the Russian side, what it initially disclosed is usually only the minimum figure. And when the actual complete figure comes out, it may not necessarily be announced. We can only conservatively say that this round of strikes has led to at least dozens of Russian deaths, and the total casualties may reach hundreds. Against the backdrop of the Russia-Ukraine war that has lasted for 2.5 years, such a situation really makes people not know how to complain. Do you say that these Russian troops were really killed by HIMARS in terms of the direct cause of death? Indeed so. Do you say that the deaths of these Russian troops are related to the West? There is indeed a connection. After all, the weapons, ammunition and intelligence were all provided by the West, but these are not the most fundamental reasons. Because what really caused the deaths of these Russian troops was precisely themselves, of course. This has little to do with those ordinary soldiers after all. Who can expect the mobilized soldiers, conscripts, and even grassroots soldiers of the National Guard who were temporarily recruited in Russia to have the same combat readiness awareness as the field army in a place dozens of kilometers away from the war zone? And even if they have this awareness, will it work if they speak out? If an ordinary soldier says that the convoy should disperse and not stay in one area for too long, will the convoy listen to him? For this loss, the officer leading the team should be directly responsible. It's understandable that ordinary soldiers are in the dark. But how could the leading officer know nothing? A large convoy of more than 20 vehicles was lined up so densely and remained stationary for a long time, allowing the Ukrainian army to calmly send drones for reconnaissance and confirmation, and deploy HIMARS for strikes. Is this loss unjust? In fact, This is not unjust at all. If one had a little bit of war awareness, this loss could have been avoided. You put the meat right in front of others' mouths. Can you blame them for taking a bite? Of course. The leading officer only bears direct responsibility. Naturally, the one with the greatest responsibility should be the Russian headquarters. The battle in the Kursk Oblast should not have been so passive originally. But after the war started, personnel were recruited temporarily and people were randomly grabbed to fill the loopholes. Could there be no problems? Disorder will lead to problems. And the root of the disorder, of course, cannot be blamed on the strikes of Ukraine, but on one's own underestimation and numbness. Giving the Ukrainian army another chance, of course. The complaints in this aspect cannot be clarified in 1 or 2 sentences. We will discuss it specifically later. And just for this convoy attack incident, the last point we want to complain about is the information control of the Russian side when everyone was debating the death of a certain senior Russian general before. We said that according to the actual situation of the Russian army, it simply cannot keep secrets and really cannot keep the death a secret for a small matter. It can't help but rush to show off impatiently. Do you still expect it to keep the death of a senior officer a secret? Like this attack on the truck convoy. If there were no videos released by the Russian side on the spot, the reaction it triggered would not be as great as it is now. Also in Kursk, 2 Ukrainian company-level units were covered by a scander. Did you see any commotion? Of course. On the military level, this not only involves public relations issues, but the key lies in the fact that the videos released by the Russian side themselves are equivalent to providing the Ukrainian army with the best on-site strike effect assessment. In the final analysis, this is not only cooperating with others before the war, but even after being attacked. Cooperating with them to complete the strike effect assessment. Isn't this ridiculous? Just like a few days ago, the Ukrainian army also used drones to attack the Russian base 300 kilometers away from the front line. The Ukrainian army could originally only judge the losses of the Russian army through satellite images, which is far from enough. As a result, the Russian army released the on-site images of the bombing inside the base the next day. What happened to the fighter jets? What happened to the ammunition depot? And what was the loss situation? Well, it's all clear at a glance with such a cooperative opponent. The relevant personnel of the Ukrainian army are estimated to be crazy with joy. The Russian army doesn't even need to expend any intelligence reconnaissance forces. It directly holds the camera to help you shoot the on-site strike effect assessment frantically and then releases it. Take a look at how well this pair of brothers, Russia and Ukraine, cooperate. You slap me, and I still put my face closer to tell you how the effect of this slap is, and then let you improve to try to hit harder next time, of course. What's even more outrageous about this pair of brothers, Russia and Ukraine, is that these problems of the Russian army also exist in the Ukrainian army originally. This attack by the Ukrainian army was systematically kept secret. We can't even know exactly which troops it used. These brigades of the Ukrainian army did implement information control and resolutely did not release the relevant results. But some people just can't hold back. Plant the flag and check in. If I don't tell you the unit number, wouldn't it be in vain? So some Ukrainian armies' participating formations were thus leaked. Moreover, the Ukrainian army also filmed and released their own battle losses. Of course, the scene was definitely not as big as that of the Russian army. At least the tragic situation where those 2 company-level units were covered. The Ukrainian army did not release it themselves, so in terms of the secrecy situation of this Kursk battle, the big brother and the second brother are still quite distinguishable. But we can definitely say that there will definitely be no shortage of troubles caused by the random release of videos by both sides in the future, including the leakage of unit numbers, marching routes, and helping the other side assess the battle results, etc. There will definitely be more. Just wait and see. The Ukrainian army captured Suja, and the Russian army is preparing to counterattack. The Ukrainian army has successfully captured Suja city. This is the first town lost on the Russian mainland since World War II. There is the largest metering station for Russian natural gas delivery to Europe in Suja city. The loss of Suja has cut the supply of Russian natural gas to Europe in half. In order to recapture the lost land, the Russian army has urgently dispatched multiple troops to rush to Kursk for support, including Wagner, with a reinforcement force reaching tens of thousands of people. However, it will take about a week for all these soldiers, weapons and equipment to arrive. It's not enough to just transport the soldiers. Heavy weapons such as tanks, armored vehicles and artillery also need to be transported, and ammunition cannot be in short supply, considering that the Ukrainian army has attacked Kursk for 3 days. The first wave of counterattack by the Russian army will probably be after 4 days. Currently, mainly some of the vanguard troops of the Russian army have dispersed into Kursk to prevent the rapid advance of the Ukrainian army. On the third day of the battle, the offensive of the Ukrainian army has slowed down. There are mainly two reasons for this. First, the reinforcement troops of the Russian army are gradually catching up. Although they cannot reverse the situation in Kursk in the short term, they can slow down the attack speed of the Ukrainian army. Second, the Ukrainian army lacks fighter jets and cannot advance directly. The tanks and armored vehicles of the Ukrainian army rely on artillery cover to move forward. After the intervention of the Russian aerospace forces, the Ukrainian army also needs to deploy large-scale air defense systems, such as Patriot, etc. The vanguard troops of the Ukrainian army have slowed down and have to wait for the artillery troops and air defense troops at the rear to catch up. Moreover, the Ukrainian army does not have the ability to fully occupy Kursk Oblast, facing the counterattack of the Russian army. The Ukrainian army needs to draw out some engineers to build trenches on the spot. The Ukrainian army has no intention of withdrawing after entering Kursk. Holding the acquired land is more crucial than penetrating deeper into Kursk. For the Ukrainian army, this is a replication of the Kharkiv campaign. In terms of intelligence warfare, the Ukrainian army deceived the Russian army once again. Many people are thinking, how did the Ukrainian army suddenly have a tank and armored group of tens of thousands of people? Where did they come from? In fact, this force is mainly stationed in Kharkiv, in the direction of Sumy. The permanent Ukrainian army force is about 4,000 people. But in Kharkiv, the Ukrainian army has assembled 80,000 main forces. The Russian army has always thought that these 80,000 Ukrainian troops wanted to counterattack in place and drive the Russian army out of Kharkiv. But Syrskyi played a feint to the east and strike to the west. They launched the Kharkiv counteroffensive, not quickly moving from Kharkiv to Sumy, but raiding Kursk and directly entering the Russian mainland. In terms of intelligence, the Russian army was completely unaware. The 20,000 to 30,000 Ukrainian troops under its nose had long left Kharkiv and moved to Sumy. This is the second major mistake of the Russian army in intelligence warfare. The first time was in the Kharkiv campaign. The main force of the Ukrainian army feigned an attack on Kherson and secretly moved northward. But the main attack direction was Kharkiv. Now, the situation in Kursk is exactly the same as that of Kharkiv in the autumn of 2022. The Ukrainian army attacked and the Russian army fled in all directions. But the difference is that Kursk is the Russian mainland and must not be lost. Under Putin's order, the Russian reinforcement troops rushed to Kursk urgently. However, the Russian army made a fatal mistake again, actually forming a long line and moving forward on the road. As a result, it was precisely airstruck by HIMARS. The entire convoy, more than 10 troop carriers and armored vehicles, were all destroyed, and the number of casualties among soldiers reached hundreds. This means that with the support of NATO, the Ukrainian army has a strong intelligence advantage. Even after entering Kursk, the Ukrainian army can still be well aware of the movements of the Russian army. In my opinion, the next actions of the Ukrainian army mainly have two options. First, take a risky raid and capture the Kursk nuclear power plant. Second, build fortresses in place, build a large number of trenches, and fight a protracted war with the Russian army in Kursk, allowing the war to continue to spread to the Russian mainland. Kursk is only the first step. Next, there are Belgorod, Bryansk, Rostov, etc., turning the four southern states of Russia into the same as the four states in eastern Ukraine. The Ukrainian army has already captured more than 300 square kilometers of land. Such a large area is large enough to build large-scale defense projects. Then deploy NATO air defense systems such as Patriot and Aerostat directly to Kursk to block the airspace, and use long-range artillery to block the ground, forming a large area of Ukrainian army-occupied area. The newly acquired F-16 does not need to enter Kursk. Just patrol along the Russia-Ukraine border, and it can launch AIM-120 long-range air-to-air missiles to shoot down Russian aircraft. For the Russian army, it is not an easy task to recapture the lost land in Kursk. They have to conquer it step by step, like in the battlefield of eastern Ukraine. One building, one move of land, and one village at a time. This will pose a significant restraint on the Russian army, and the Ukrainian army can further attack the logistics lines of the Russian mainland. The stalemate between Russia and Ukraine is no longer limited to the four eastern Ukrainian states. Kursk has also become a new battlefield.